Hello, and welcome to another fun-filled episode of Married with Baby Cat. So, we missed last week. We apologize. Melissa was a little under the weather, so it's all her fault. You can blame her.
I was sick.
Send all your emails and texts and phone calls of how you were sitting on the edge of your seat waiting for the new Married with Baby Cat, and it didn't come out last week because Melissa was sick and ruined it for everybody. So you can send all your disgust towards Melissa's way.
You're so mean.
She's better now, though, which is good. Nothing serious.
No.
So.
Sick.
Just sick. Too sick to do a podcast.
Yeah. Really enjoyed the couch that week.
Yeah, but then you get kind of stir crazy, right?
That's true. Yeah, by Sunday I was like, get me out of here.
Yeah.
We went out.
You almost had the inkling of wanting to go back to work. Almost.
I kind of did work at home.
You did?
A little bit.
Like, you kind of went back to work sometimes when you're out that long. I know it's crazy to say, but...
Yeah, I guess so. Kind of. I don't miss commuting, that's the thing. Work is one thing, but I don't like commuting. Baby cat.
I know, I was hoping you to get back to work, so I wasn't
so mean.
Wasn't your slave anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Kevin was my helper, and Baby Cat is sitting all over Kevin's nice art posters.
Yeah, my awesome Gambit poster signed by the original inker now has Baby Cat's butt on it. So
she's so bad.
She's here with everybody. Just so everybody knows, when we really say Married with Baby Cat, we really mean Baby Cat, because she's usually always right here with the podcast.
Yes.
Watching us, probably plotting how to kill us.
Yeah, she's plotting our death right as we speak.
She's like, if I could figure out how to kill you guys and still eat, you guys would have been dead a long time ago. Yeah. But she hasn't been able to figure out, not having opposable thumbs, she hasn't been able to figure out how to open things, so...
Yeah, it's mainly her wet food. She doesn't know how to use a can opener, so...
Yeah, and she'd have to open the fridge and all that. It's pretty tough for a kitty. So, but she's here with us. So we're going to do something very different this week, but something that I kind of want to do more often. We're going to do... Well, we have done it a little bit before. We've done album reviews.
Yes.
But we're going to do something a little different with the album reviews. Is we're going to review old albums from all different time periods. We'll probably jump around. There's no discernible order or anything. We're going to go over the album, kind of review it almost like it's kind of new and that we have never heard it before. We'll give a little history behind it, whatever album we're doing that week. But we're going to try to talk about each individual song like we just heard it kind of for the first time, and what we heard about it, and what we think about it, and then kind of relay that to the history of the album itself. So the first album we decided to do, I think it was a good choice, was the Beatles' Revolver.
You did a good choice.
You did a good choice.
You did a good choice.
I think we did a good choice because it's really the album that kind of bridges the old Beatles to the new Beatles.
That is true.
It's the album that changed kind of everything. It's right around the year that kind of changed everything for rock and roll. Mm-hmm. I'm going to read some of the other albums that came out in 1966, some debut albums, and you could see that the landscape was shifting.
It was also their final Beatles. They weren't going to tour anymore, so they were able to really play with some sounds.
Do all the studio stuff, which was kind of becoming new now, and they were kind of some of the forebearers. Not the first, because as you can see, there's going to be some other albums that came out before them. So they weren't the first, but they kind of perfected it.
As always.
The Beatles, they were the best at the time, so still are the best.
Yep.
So we're both big. It's obviously my favorite band. It's one of your favorites. Up there with Aerosmith.
Yeah. I mean, I'll even admit the Beatles are better than Aerosmith. But I feel like that's a given with any, music genre. It's like, you kind of have to give it to the Beatles, and then you move on from there.
Well, they're kind of in their own echelon, right?
Yeah.
It's like the Beatles, and then you got, everybody else.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people who don't like them, which I don't know how you can't like them, but there's people that say they don't like them, but they respect their influence, whatever that means. They're the best. I don't care what anybody says. It's not arguable.
That is true.
So this album was great because, like I said, it bridged from the old Beatles, talking about kind of every song about love and Hey Girl and all that stuff, to deeper topics, more current event topics, as we'll get into a little bit with the first song. and really experimenting with the musical stuff.
Yeah,
Bringing in
experiment.
other forms of music, not just guitar and rock, because we're going to go over a lot of songs. It was also the dawning of, I think, one of the Beatles, which I will get into more. But I think one of the Beatles really took off in this album and really dominated from this point on. But
Interesting.
I'll get into that.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll
we'll
bring
see.
that up. I think there's one of the Beatles who really dominated this album. So
I have a feeling we're going to disagree here, but
probably
that's
that's good. That's what makes a good discussion. But the Beatles were shaped after this. Everything that they did was shaped from this album, and it definitely influenced a lot of other albums, influenced a lot of music, and I think Revolver still influences a lot of music today, even or way after at least the album came out. And yes, I do think albums like Sgt. Pepper's and White Album are better because they perfected it even more. But Revolver was the start of it all, so I thought it was a good album to pick. It's an album that when you talk about the Beatles, then everyone brings up right away.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to bring up White Album, Sgt. Pepper's, or even in the early stuff, Meet the Beatles and stuff like that.
Except for me, because this is one of my favorite
Right.
albums.
Now, it was kind of the second side almost. They almost did like a dual album. The first one was Rubber Soul.
Yeah.
But Rubber Soul was still a little bit of experimenting, but still was basically the old school Beatles kind of stuff.
Yes.
And in this one, they just went in some crazy direction, and it was awesome.
It's called LSD.
Yeah, it's probably when they started experimenting with drugs. It's actually...
Probably 100%.
Yeah. It's also when they started getting to other things besides drugs, like the whole Indian and Ravi Shankar and all that. And it's also when they got closer to Bob Dylan, because Bob Dylan was definitely a huge influence on the Beatles.
Yes.
And they really started hanging out with them around this time, and then you could tell in the music. So, it's actually the 7th studio album by the Beatles. So they had 6 ones before that. Mm-hmm. It was released August 5th, 1966. It was produced, of course, like every one of their albums except for one, by George Martin. The genius, George Martin.
Yes.
And his genius is all over this album.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the Beatles. But what they had to accomplish, he had to be part of it too. He helped. I'm still furious over not getting my signed George Martin record.
Well, you can thank the Butler post office for that.
I don't think it was Butler. It's like wherever this was coming from.
Nope,
They probably
thank
lost
the
in
post
train.
office for that.
So my brother, for Christmas, I think 2 or 3 years ago, got me this really cool gift. I never actually received it, but he did buy it. So he goes, "Hey, I got you a different gift, but your real gift got lost in the mail." I was like, "Oh, that kind of stinks." Okay, well, what was it? Well, I bought you, I forget what album it was. I think it might have been one of the later ones. I think it might have been Abbey Road. I got you one of the albums for the Beatles, vinyl, signed by George Martin. And I was like, what? That is insane. It's one of a kind thing. It's awesome. The post office lost it, and that's it. They just lost it, and they don't care.
I.e. somebody took it.
Yeah, I mean, probably. And their response was literally to him, well, that kind of stinks. All right, goodbye. So that album's just lost somewhere at somebody's wall. Not
I was
not
going to
mine.
say, it's quote unquote, lost in somebody's apartment or house.
Not my wall. So I'm very upset about that. And it's not something he could just re-get for me again. Oh, it's lost? Okay, I'll just get you another one, Kevin. No, that's it. So that really stinks. So I'm still bitter about that. Anyway, the genius of George Martin is all over this album. I thought this was interesting when I read this. I didn't know this. So Rolling Stone did their top 500 albums of all time. Mm-hmm. Where do you think they rank this, just in general?
Oh God, on 500?
Yeah.
I remember buying that album, that book too.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm gonna say 20.
Too low. They actually ranked this number 3 album of all time.
Really?
Yeah, I was very surprised about that.
What was number 1?
I didn't go into the whole list. They probably gave number 1. I think
We'll just look it up.
they would give number 1. I think it might be Ziggy Stardust.
Really? Over the Beatles?
Well, I would put Ziggy Stardust over the Beatles too, actually. Probably. But I would actually choose the White Album as the best Beatles album. But they chose... Now, I don't know if they had White Album 2 or 1 ahead of the Revolver, but they actually had Revolver number 3. I thought that was pretty crazy.
It is pretty crazy.
Thought that was interesting. So obviously they really understand the significance of it. If you're a big Beatles fan, you know the significance of the Revolver. So we looked it up, And it turns out they actually gave number 1 to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I always thought the White Album was better, personally. But that's why it's all opinion.
Yep.
Rolling Stones. Okay, so some other albums that came out in 1966. And I'm going to give some of the months so you can kind of get a concept of when this music was starting to kind of develop. And you can see Revolver was smack right in the middle of it. The Beatles probably didn't, like I said, they didn't start this, but they definitely perfected it. So you have the Mamas and the Papas debut album, which is If You Can Believe Your Ears and Eyes. That's the album with Monday, Monday, and California Dreamin'. That came out March 66.
Okay.
You have
harmony vocals on that one.
Exactly. And they actually did cover a Beatles song as well, and you can definitely hear some influence from the Beatles in them, and then vice versa, I believe. You have the debut album of Jefferson Airplane, Takes Off, it was called.
Don't you want somebody to love?
Exactly. Actually, that song's not on that album. But
oh, it's not?
No. But that's August.
Close enough.
So you can see definitely already a shift in music and rock and roll from going from the Buddy Holly's, Elvis's, Chuck Berry style stuff to more psychedelic stuff now in 66.
Yep. The hippie stuff.
With the Mamas and Papas and Jefferson Airplane, who's known for being super psychedelic. Donovan, Sunshine Superman, that's July 66. So all kind of, around the same time here. You had the debut of the Small Faces album, also called Small Faces, their self-titled album. Now the Small Faces are big because eventually Rod Stewart was in the Small Faces with Ron Wood.
Interesting.
They didn't start out in the band. They weren't in the band when this album was released, but eventually those guys joined. And then obviously Ron Wood went to the Rolling Stones, and Rod Stewart had his own thing.
Right. If you want my body,
exactly.
Think I'm sexy. That comes out in the 70s.
Yes, that was not on this album, since Rod Stewart was not even on this album. Then you have Them. It's called the band, and their album was Them Again. This was big because
I've never heard of them.
This was Van Morrison's band before he went on his branch on his own and became Van Morrison. You have Simon and Garfunkel, Sounds of Silence, in 66. Interesting thing about that album, little history, is that Sounds of Silence was already released, but was a total failure. The song.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was like an acoustic kind of song. So they redid this album. These guys in England redid this album, and they added electric drums and guitars and stuff to it, and it became the Sounds of Silence that we all know today.
That was covered by Disturbed.
Yeah, exactly.
Had a resurgence.
And the album then shot up. I'm pretty sure it went number 1 at the time it was released as well. So they had a David Bowie moment where he did Space Oddity, didn't go off at first, and then it came back later and shot him into the stratosphere. So that album, you have Buffalo Springfield. The album also Buffalo Springfield. That's Stephen Stills and Neil Young.
Blah.
Who went on to, of course, do Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young.
And then went off and did their own thing.
And Neil Young did his own thing, yep. But they were just coming around. You have Who, a quick one. So the Who kind of started off as a Beatles ripoff.
No.
No. A little bit. Those early Who songs.
No.
You could hear it.
They were definitely more defiant and punkish.
A little bit.
And then they came out with this album, which is not good.
But it has a great song on it.
It has a great song on it done live.
Yeah, the live version.
You got to listen to the live version, not the actual album version.
It's like a Kiss rock and roll all night scenario.
I could talk about this album.
Maybe that's for another day.
The problem with that album is the manager, whoever, I don't know if it was the manager of the record label, wanted all of the guys in the band to write songs. And as we know, Pete Townsend is the brain behind the Who, so it didn't do very well. So
and he's the only one that should be writing songs.
Yeah, so unfortunately, that's not a very good album for the Who.
You have Cream's debut album called Fresh Cream. Cream, of course, being Eric Clapton's band. Mm-hmm. And they were a little different. They had the psychedelic stuff a little bit, but they were definitely more blues rock.
That was debut?
Yep. Yeah, Eric Clapton before that was in the Yardbirds.
Yeah.
Sessioning for people. This is
doing lots of heroin.
Yeah, well, he did that for a long time. This is before he was on the White Album doing guitar, While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Before he was friends with George Harrison.
They might have been friends.
I was gonna say
they probably knew
friends,
each other,
yeah.
but this is where Eric Clapton became Eric Clapton. With Cream. Great band. definitely suggest listening to them. Disraeli Gears is